In the unforgiving West, the deepest wounds are not from bullets, but from betrayal. Yet the will to survive is a medicine no poison can overcome. Dust settled on Cordelia's cracked lips, mixing with the salt of her tears. For a week, the bottom of the old, dry well at the Crow's Nest Ranch had been her prison. Every stone seemed to press into her bruised body, but the sharpest pain was the betrayal that had pierced her heart. Her stepfather, the respected Dr. Julian Blackwood, had cast her into this darkness with his own hands. She remembered the cold finality in his eyes, a look that sealed her fate. The memory was a fresh wound, bleeding despair into the suffocating silence. The sun beat down from the small circle of blue sky above, a cruel reminder of a world she might never see again. Her strength was gone, leaving only a hollow ache. The scene played over and over in her mind. "You leave me no choice, Cordelia," Julian had said, his voice smooth as polished stone. His grip on her arm was like iron. Her stepsisters, Agatha and Doris, stood behind him. Their fine dresses were a stark contrast to the dust and grime. They did not intervene. They only watched, their faces masks of cold satisfaction. "You should have learned your place," Agatha had whispered, the words like a snake's hiss. Doris just smiled, a cruel curve of her lips that mirrored her father's coldness. The betrayal from all three was a weight far heavier than the stones that now formed her prison. They were her family, yet they had condemned her without a trial. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, Lydia, trapped in that house of deceit. Lydia was bedridden, helpless, at the mercy of the man who had orchestrated her fall. A wave of nausea washed over Cordelia. Was her mother safe? Did she even know what had become of her daughter? The thought of Lydia suffering alone, believing Cordelia had abandoned her, was a torment worse than hunger or thirst. She had to survive. She had to get back to her mother. But as another day bled into night, the sliver of hope she clung to grew thinner, threatening to snap under the immense pressure of her despair. The darkness in the well was absolute, a reflection of the darkness that had consumed her life. Her consciousness began to fray at the edges. Thirst was a fire in her throat, and hunger a dull, constant ache in her belly. The world narrowed to the circle of sky above, a blinding patch of Arizona blue. Was it the 7th day? The 8th? Time had lost all meaning. As her eyes fluttered closed, a shadow fell across the opening of the well. A dark silhouette blotted out the sun. For a moment, she thought it was the angel of death, come to claim her at last. Or perhaps it was just a mirage, a final trick of a mind starved of hope. She tried to call out, but only a dry rasp escaped her lips. The figure remained, a silent sentinel against the unforgiving sky. Hota, a warrior of the Cheyenne people, read the story in the dust. The scuffed tracks told of a struggle, a small boot print, dragged and uneven, and the deeper impression of a man's heavy heel. His path across the desolate land had brought him to this abandoned well. Something was wrong here. The air itself felt heavy with unspoken violence. His keen eyes scanned the area, missing nothing. He saw the frayed end of a rope near the well's edge, the disturbed earth. He approached the opening cautiously, his movements silent and fluid. He peered into the darkness below, his gaze sharp enough to pierce the gloom. He saw a flicker of white fabric, a human form lying unnaturally still. He saw the rickety ladder leaning against the stone wall. It was a death trap, its rungs rotten and loose. A fool's solution. Hota was no fool. He uncoiled the strong lariat from his saddle horn, the braided leather familiar in his hands. He spoke a quiet word to his Mustang, a sturdy horse that stood as still as the canyon rocks. With practiced ease, he secured one end of the rope to the pommel, testing the knot twice. He would trust his life to his horse and his own strength, not to the careless work of another man. This was the Cheyenne way, to rely on skill and preparation, to respect the dangers of the land and never underestimate them. He was ready to descend. He lowered himself over the edge, the rough stones scraping against his leather leggings. The old ladder groaned in protest as he used it for footholds, his weight testing each rung before he committed to it. The air grew cool and stale, thick with the scent of dry earth and despair. Below, the woman was a pale shape in the gloom. He could see the dark bruises on her arms, the dirt smudged across her face. He landed softly on the well floor, his moccasins making no sound. He knelt beside her, his presence a quiet intrusion into her lonely prison. Her breathing was shallow, a faint flutter of life in a body that had nearly surrendered to death. Gently, he gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as fragile as a bird. The ascent was more difficult, a slow and careful climb, his muscles straining with the effort of carrying them both. His Mustang stood firm, a reliable anchor in the world above. As he emerged into the blinding sunlight, he laid her carefully on the ground. He took his blanket from his saddle roll and wrapped it around her thin frame, shielding her from the harsh sun. Without a word, he lifted her onto his horse, settling her in front of him. He turned his Mustang towards the hidden canyons, the silent promise of sanctuary guiding his way. Cordelia awoke to the scent of wild sage and roasting meat. A low, melodic chant filled the air, a sound both strange and comforting. She was not in the well. She lay on a soft buffalo robe inside a teepee, the conical walls glowing with the warm light of a small fire. An elderly woman with kind, wise eyes sat beside her, grinding herbs in a stone bowl. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at Cordelia. Where was she? Who were these people? She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. The woman looked at her and offered a gentle smile. "Be still, child," she said, her voice like the rustling of leaves. "You are safe now. Rest." The woman's name was Nemea, the healer of the tribe. For days she tended to Cordelia, spooning warm, healing broths between her lips. Hata visited often. He would enter the teepee silently, place a water skin or a piece of freshly cooked meat beside her, and then leave. He never spoke, but his eyes met hers. In his gaze, she saw no pity, only a calm strength and a profound respect she had never known from the men in her own world. It was a silent conversation that spoke more than words. A fragile trust began to form in the space between them, a tiny seed of warmth in the winter of her soul. He was her rescuer, a quiet guardian in this strange new world. In the haze of fever, her past returned in vivid, painful flashes. She saw her mother, Lydia, laughing as they rode horses across the open range, her hair flying in the wind. Then she saw the fall, the unnatural way the horse had stumbled. She saw her stepfather's face, his feigned concern masking a cold calculation. She saw the bottles of his elixir, the dark liquid that promised so much and delivered only addiction and ruin. The memories were a torrent, threatening to drown her. But each time she woke, gasping for air, Nemea was there, her calm presence a lifeline pulling her back to the safety of the present. As her strength returned, Cordelia began to speak. She told Nemea everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of grief and anger. She spoke of her happy childhood, of her mother's sudden illness, and of the growing darkness in their home. She described the moment she found Julian's secret journal, the elegant script detailing the vile truth of his elixir. "He poisoned them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He poisoned them all for money, and my mother, I think she knew." Nemea listened patiently, her wise eyes holding Cordelia's pain. She did not offer empty words of comfort, only her unwavering presence, which was a balm to Cordelia's wounded spirit. In the bustling town of Silver Canyon, the sign for Dr. Blackwood's apothecary was a beacon of hope for the sick and desperate. His universal elixir was famous throughout the territory. It promised to cure everything from a common cold to consumption. People paid fortunes for the small, dark bottles. Julian Blackwood, with his tailored suit and silver-tongued charm, had built an empire on this promise. He was a pillar of the community, a man of science and charity. But behind the facade of respectability was a man hollowed out by greed. His success was not built on healing, but on a carefully crafted and deadly deception. The secret ingredient was laudanum, an opium tincture. Mixed with willow bark and other common herbs, it provided temporary relief, a fleeting escape from pain that soon turned into the chains of addiction. The journal Cordelia had found was a ledger of this damnation. In it, Blackwood coldly detailed his formula and the ever-increasing profits. He wrote of his patients not as people, but as assets. He even noted how a higher dose of laudanum ensured their return. It was a business model built on human suffering, a web of deceit spun from a small dark bottle, and he was the spider at its center, growing fat on the lives he consumed. Cordelia's discovery had been an accident. A door left unlocked, a journal left on a desk. As she read, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Her mother's fall had happened shortly after Lydia had questioned the elixir's ingredients. Lydia, an accomplished horsewoman, would not have fallen by accident. Julian must have arranged it. The realization struck Cordelia with the force of a physical blow. Her stepfather had not only built his fortune on lies, but he had also tried to murder his own wife to protect his secret. The man she had once respected was a monster, and she was living under his roof, completely at his mercy. She confronted him in his laboratory, the open journal in her trembling hand. "This is poison," she had said, her voice barely a whisper. "You are killing these people." For a moment, his charming mask slipped, revealing the cold, predatory emptiness beneath. He did not deny it. "It is a business, Cordelia. A very profitable one," he replied, his voice calm. "And you will not interfere." That was when he grabbed her. The fight was short and brutal. He was stronger, his fury giving him an unnatural power. As he dragged her from the house, she knew her life was over. The reputation he had built was worth more to him than her life. "You must go to the law," Cordelia pleaded with Hota, her voice gaining strength each day. "Tell them what he did." Hota looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a deep sadness. He knew the world she spoke of, a world where his word was worth less than the dust on his moccasins. "Their law is not for my people," he said quietly. "They will not listen to a Cheyenne." But as he looked at her earnest, hopeful face, he saw the conviction in her eyes. A feeling he could not name stirred in his chest. For her he would try. For her he would face the town that saw him as less than a man. He gave a slow nod. "I will go," he promised. The town of Silver Canyon was a hostile place. Men stopped and stared as Hota rode down the main street, their hands moving instinctively towards their sidearms. Women pulled their children close, whispering behind their hands. He ignored them, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the sheriff's office. He dismounted and entered the small, dusty building. Sheriff Calder, a man with a weary face and a star pinned to his vest, looked up from his desk. His eyes were cold and dismissive. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone making it clear that Hota was an unwelcome interruption. The air in the room was thick with years of ingrained prejudice. Hota told his story in a clear, steady voice. He spoke of the well, of the girl he had found, and of the name she had accused, Dr. Julian Blackwood. Sheriff Calder listened with a cynical smirk. "So a respected doctor tries to kill his own stepdaughter, and one of you heathens just happens to find her?" He scoffed. "That is a fine tale. Get out of my office before I have you hanged for lying about a good man." Hota's hands tightened into fists at his sides, but he held his anger in check. He turned and walked out, his pride a shield against the sheriff's scorn. He had expected this, yet the injustice still burned. As Hota left, a young deputy named Owen watched him go. Owen had seen the honesty in the Cheyenne warrior's eyes. He had also seen the fear in Dr. Blackwood's patience, the desperation that seemed to go beyond mere illness. "Sheriff," Owen said hesitantly, "maybe there is something to it. People say strange things about that elixir." Calder shot him a glare. "You are young, Owen. You do not know how these savages lie. Blackwood is a good man, a friend. Case closed." But Owen was not so sure. A seed of doubt had been planted in his mind, and he had a feeling it was going to grow. Despite his dismissive words, Sheriff Calder was unsettled. The Cheyenne's story, as wild as it sounded, had a ring of truth to it that he could not ignore. He decided to pay a visit to the Crow's Nest Ranch, just to put his mind at ease. He found Julian Blackwood in his study, looking the part of a grieving father. "Sheriff, thank heaven you are here," Blackwood said, his voice thick with false emotion. "My daughter, Cordelia. She has run off. I fear she has been taken by one of those savages from the canyons." He painted a vivid picture of a rebellious girl lured away by a dangerous warrior. Blackwood led the sheriff to Cordelia's room. The scene was perfectly staged. A chair was overturned, a vase of flowers shattered on the floor, and a window was left open to the wind. It looked like the site of a violent struggle. He took her from her own room. Blackwood lamented, burying his face in his hands. Calder, a simple man who trusted what he saw, was completely convinced. He placed a comforting hand on the doctor's shoulder. "We will find her, doctor, and the savage who took her will pay." Unwittingly, the sheriff gave Blackwood the very information he needed, describing the general location of the Cheyenne camp he had heard rumors about. Meanwhile, a new threat arrived in Silver Canyon. Bartholomew Graves, a ruthless landowner with a reputation for violence, confronted Blackwood in the town saloon. Graves was a large, imposing man with cold, dead eyes. "You owe me a great deal of money, doctor," Graves said in a low voice, his hand resting on the handle of his revolver. "My patience is wearing thin. I want my money, or I will take your ranch." Blackwood was trapped. His elixir business was profitable, but he had been reckless. Now, with Cordelia alive and the threat of exposure looming, he was cornered like a rat. Blackwood's mind raced. He was being squeezed from all sides. Cordelia was a witness who could destroy him. Graves was a predator who would bleed him dry. He needed a solution, a bold and brutal move that would solve all his problems at once. The information from Sheriff Calder was a gift from the devil. He now knew where to find Cordelia and the Cheyenne camp. A dark plan began to form in his mind, a plan that would use one threat to eliminate the other. He would silence Cordelia forever and pay his debt to Graves in blood and land. He just needed to convince Graves to do his dirty work. "You must go to them," Blackwood instructed his daughters, Agatha and Doris. "Take them gifts, provisions, blankets. Convince them you come in peace." He handed them a heavy basket. "Find Cordelia. Make certain she is there, and if you get the chance—" He let the sentence hang in the air, his meaning clear and cold. Agatha's eyes glittered with cruel understanding, but Doris looked nervous. "Father, what if they do not believe us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Then you will make them believe you," Blackwood snapped. "Our entire future depends on it. Do not fail me." He needed confirmation that Cordelia was in the camp before he sent Graves and his men. Agatha and Doris rode out to the canyons, their fine dresses looking absurdly out of place in the rugged landscape. They found the Cheyenne camp easily, following the directions Blackwood had pried from the sheriff. Hota and several other warriors met them at the edge of the camp, their faces grim and unwelcoming. "We come in peace," Agatha announced, forcing a sweet smile. "We are worried about our sister Cordelia. We have brought gifts for your people as a sign of goodwill." She held out the basket of food and a bundle of new wool blankets, her performance of a concerned sister almost believable. Cordelia emerged from Nemia's teepee, her heart pounding when she saw her stepsisters. For a fleeting moment, a foolish hope surged within her. Had they come to rescue her? Had they defied their father? She saw the basket in their hands, filled with her mother's favorite honey cakes. The sight was a painful reminder of home. But then she saw Hota's face, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He stepped in front of her, a protective barrier. He took one of the blankets from the bundle. It felt unnaturally heavy. With a swift movement, he tossed it onto the nearby campfire. The wool, instead of smoldering, erupted in an oily, black smoke. The smoke was acrid and foul. It was not the smell of burning wool. The blanket had been soaked in oil, a trick to make it catch fire quickly, but Nemia recognized the faint, sickly sweet smell mixed with the smoke. It was the scent of disease, of smallpox. The blankets were a gift of death. The betrayal was absolute. The warriors seized the two sisters, their feigned smiles vanishing, replaced by masks of pure terror. Under the stern gaze of the Cheyenne chief, they confessed everything. They told of their father's plan, of his lies, and of his murderous intent. The serpent's gift had been returned to the sender. The news of his daughter's capture reached Blackwood like a death sentence. He was out of time. Cordelia was alive, and now the Cheyenne knew the truth. It was only a matter of time before they came for him, or before the sheriff's deputy Owen started asking more questions. Desperation drove him to Bartholomew Graves. He found the landowner in his opulent hotel room, cleaning a large-caliber revolver. "I have a proposition for you," Blackwood said, his voice strained. "One that will clear my debt and make you a very wealthy man." Graves looked up, his cold eyes showing a flicker of interest. He gestured for Blackwood to continue. "The Crow's Nest Ranch," Blackwood began, "is yours. I will sign the deed over to you tonight." Graves raised an eyebrow. "And in return?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "There is a camp of heathens in the canyons," Blackwood explained, his words slick with venom. "They are holding my daughter. I want you to ride out there with your men. Wipe them out. All of them. Leave no witnesses." He made it sound like a rescue mission, a father's desperate plea to save his child from savages. He conveniently left out the part about the blankets, his own capture of Cordelia, and the truth of his elixir. Graves considered the offer. He cared nothing for Blackwood's daughter or the Cheyenne. But he cared a great deal about land. The Crow's Nest was one of the best ranches in the territory, with access to a steady water source. To get it for simply doing what he enjoyed most, unleashing violence, was an irresistible offer. "It will be made to look like an Indian raid gone wrong," Blackwood added. "The sheriff will believe anything I tell him." Graves smiled, a chilling sight that did not reach his eyes. "You have a deal, Doctor," he said. "Gather your men," he told one of his waiting thugs. "We ride at midnight." As night fell, a group of hard men gathered on the edge of town. They were hired guns, outlaws, and killers, all loyal to Graves and his money. They checked their rifles and filled their ammunition belts, their faces grim in the moonlight. Blackwood, armed with a new rifle, rode with them. He had to be there to make sure the job was done right, to ensure Cordelia's voice was silenced forever. As they rode towards the canyons, a cold wind kicked up, howling through the rocks like a mournful spirit. It was a fitting soundtrack for the devil's work they were about to do. They were confident, a pack of wolves moving in for the kill. The Cheyenne were not sleeping. Hota's scouts had been watching the town since the sisters' arrival. They saw the gathering of armed men and sent a swift rider back to the camp with a warning. There was no panic. Instead, a quiet, focused determination settled over the people. This was their home, and they would defend it. Hota, his face painted for battle, moved among the warriors, his voice low and steady. He was not just a warrior. He was a leader. He knew the canyon, like the back of his hand. Every rock, every shadow. He would use the land itself as a weapon against the invaders. The canyon would become a tomb for their enemies. Hota positioned his warriors high up on the canyon walls, hidden in the darkness. They were armed with bows and arrows, their silence a far deadlier weapon than the loud rifles of Graves' men. A few warriors with firearms were placed at key choke points. It was a classic ambush. When Graves and his mercenaries rode into the narrow passage, they were riding into a trap. They were arrogant, expecting to find a sleeping camp. They did not see the silent figures watching them from above, arrows already notched on bowstrings. The night was still, the only sound the clatter of hooves on stone. The attack began with a single, piercing whistle from Hota. A volley of arrows rained down on the riders below. Men cried out in shock and pain. Horses reared and fell. The mercenaries, caught completely by surprise, fired their rifles wildly into the darkness. The canyon erupted in a chaos of muzzle flashes, ricocheting bullets and war cries. Cordelia, her fear replaced by a fierce resolve, worked alongside Nemea, tearing strips of cloth for bandages. She would not hide. She would help defend the people who had saved her. She was no longer a victim, she was a survivor. In the midst of the battle, Hota saw Graves trying to rally his men. He also saw Blackwood, cowering behind a rock, his face pale with terror. Hota moved through the shadows, silent as a mountain cat. He confronted Graves, who was a formidable opponent, large and powerful. But Hota was faster, more agile. The fight was a blur of motion, ending when Graves fell, a Cheyenne arrow in his chest. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining mercenaries lost their nerve. Their organized attack dissolved into a panicked retreat as the Cheyenne warriors descended from the rocks to surround them. The battle for the canyon was over. As the first light of dawn touched the canyon walls, the sound of approaching horses echoed in the sudden silence. It was Sheriff Calder and his deputy, Owen. Spurred by Owen's persistent doubts and the reports of a large group of armed men leaving town, Calder had finally decided to investigate. They rode into a scene of carnage. They saw the bodies of known outlaws and the captured, terrified survivors of Graves' gang. Hota stood tall and proud amidst the aftermath, his presence commanding respect. The evidence of a planned attack was undeniable. The sheriff's face was grim as he finally understood the truth. The captured mercenaries were quick to talk, each man trying to save his own skin. They told the sheriff everything, confirming the deal between Graves and Blackwood. They pointed to the doctor, who was being held by two warriors. Blackwood, his fine suit now torn and filthy, looked like a cornered animal. His web of lies had finally unraveled completely. "He told us it was a rescue." One of the men spat. "He said you sent him." Sheriff Calder looked at Blackwood with utter contempt. The man he had defended, the pillar of his community, was nothing more than a cold-blooded killer. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived in Silver Canyon. The trial in Silver Canyon was swift and decisive. The testimony of the captured mercenaries left no room for doubt. Dr. Blackwood was sentenced to a life of hard labor, destined to break rocks under the blistering sun for the new railroad, a fate many considered worse than death. His daughters, Agatha and Doris, were sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, their youth and beauty to fade behind stone walls. Cordelia sold the Crow's Nest Ranch, leaving its dark memories behind. With the money, she ensured her mother, Lydia, received the best care. Freed from her husband's poison, Lydia began a slow recovery, her spirit returning day by day. The dark chapter of their lives was finally closed. Cordelia did not return to the world she had known. Her home was now with Hota and his people, in the quiet strength of the canyons. She had found more family in the Cheyenne camp than she had ever known in her father's house. Her love for Hota was a quiet, powerful force, forged in trauma and sealed with mutual respect. Their union was a bridge between two worlds, a testament to the fact that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the West, love could find a way to bloom. Together they stood on a ridge overlooking the canyon, watching the sunrise paint the sky, ready to face a new day, a new life, together,